London, England used to be really stinky. I mean, really stinky. Really stinky. What do you think of when you think of the Victorian era? To be clear, the Victorian era started in 1838 and ended in 1901 with the death of Queen Victoria. I think after Victoria was George V. I can't be sure about that, but I think that's who it was. And then, of course, Queen Elizabeth II in 1958. Again, my dates are fuzzy. I'm not much of a historian, but I do know a little bit about the Victorian era. Like many places in the 19th century, England was going through huge technological advances and scientific advances. But one thing they were kind of slow on was germ theory. There was a doctor in the early 1800s that proposed the germ theory of disease, and his name was John Snow, not to be confused with the guy in Game of Thrones. And Dr. John Snow was largely mocked by other so-called medical experts of the time. They believed in something called the miasma theory of disease, which is that disease is caused by stinky air, basically. Well, it was logical, right? When people get real sick, they smell really bad. So it was the miasma theory, maybe pronounced miasma, depending on where you live. But of course, they were wrong. A lot of illnesses are caused by bacteria and viruses. But anyway, nobody paid attention to Snow. Now, getting back to London, shouldn't have inhaled that. Getting back to London being a very stinky place. Remember, they were heating completely with coal. Coal at the time was fairly dirty, still is, but a lot of sulfur in the coal. The air was very sooty. The famous London fog that everybody talks about. A foggy day in London town. Well, fog was actually smog. They charitably referred to it sometimes as industrial fog in the late 19th century. Well, during the reign of Queen Victoria, or near the reign of Queen Victoria, because the first big cholera outbreak was in 1824. But there were 3 huge cholera outbreaks in London in the 19th century. The last one being 1884, I think. But they never figured out that you can get germs from shit. I know it sounds commonplace knowledge now, but they really didn't understand that. But what they did understand is everybody had to either go out to an outhouse to do their business, or they had something in their rooms called a night jar, also called a chamber pot. And if it was just pee, they just open the window in the morning and just dump it out the window. Big apartment houses, 2, 3 stories, 4 stories, would have what was literally a poop chute. At the back of every toilet closet was a shaft that would go down to something called a cesspit. But those got very stinky, of course, because the smell would still rise up through that shaft and into the toilet stall. Shaft. That's what I said, shaft, right on. Pass that one if you didn't get it. Anyway, this pipe is about done. I think I'll have to switch to snuff. Anyway, in 1851, a very enterprising and clever fellow by the name of Thomas Crapper, yes, that was his name, Thomas Crapper invented what we now know as the water closet or flush toilet. Patented it, and it became very popular because for the first time, Londoners could take a crap. Yes, that's also where the word comes from the name Thomas Crapper. They could take their crap and the water would flush it away and there'd be virtually no odor. Let's do a pinch. See what I did there? Crap, pinch. Nah. Here we go. Just one problem. They hadn't figured out sanitary sewers yet. So basically, all the effluvium from the toilets ran into one of a couple of rivers running through London. Now, eventually, they got smart and they covered those rivers up, but they became big natural drainage ditches for all this poop and pee. And it all went right out into the River Thames, Father Thames, the big river that passes through London. Look it up on a map. Now, the Thames is a fairly wide and fairly shallow river in some places. And in 1858, the waters to the north part of the river, the upper Thames, dried up. And the River Thames in London dropped by several feet. It was almost dry. Well, you can imagine what was left behind on the banks. Human feces, animal feces, dead animals, industrial oils and solvents. It stank. It stank bad. And it became known as the Big Stink of 1858. Horrible. You couldn't breathe. Imagine, you have something like, in those days, something like 7.5 million inhabitants in London, even back then. And they're using their brand new, exciting flush toilets. And all that poop is going right into the river. No surprise that everybody was getting cholera, because they were also drawing their drinking water from the Thames. But in 1858, it was revealed truly how much shit was in the River Thames, and it stank to high heaven. Hot summer in London, stinky. Very, very, very stinky. To the point where people would have to cover their mouths and noses with handkerchiefs to try to filter out the smell. It never really worked. Well, one good thing about this situation, and it's probably one reason why we can't get anything positive done in Washington, D.C. these days, is that this big sewer, this big poop pile, runs right past the Houses of Parliament. And in 1858, both houses quickly, and I mean quickly, enacted legislation that allocated 3 million English pounds. That's billions of dollars in today's currency. 3 million English pounds to solve the problem of the big stink. And they did, and they built a sewer system through London, brilliantly designed, that would keep the poop away from the Thames. Smart idea. Now, people still got sick with cholera one more time because they were still being careless with their poop. And remember, a lot of people could not afford Thomas Crapper's fancy new toilet. You know, they were still crapping in outhouses and undoubtedly not washing their hands afterwards. And then they would make food and people would get sick. But it really knocked down the cholera very quickly because the poop was no longer going into the drinking water. Nonetheless, London remained a stinky, stinky place for many years thereafter. And it isn't so stinky anymore. It's kind of dirty, but it's not stinky anymore. And you can imagine how useful. See, this all ties into nasal snuff, right? It has to, because this is a snuff channel. I'm going to do some more of this delicious particular from Mullins and Wesley. Take another pinch here. But anyway, that's the story of the big stink of 1858, and it's one of the reasons, I'm sure, that nasal snuff became very popular in the very late 18th century and all the way through the beginnings of the 20th century. Cheers. See, not only did they have a problem with human waste, but they also had a problem with dead animals. Now, when a horse was near death, they would take the horse to a place called a knackery, where the horse was killed and typically put into like a big vat. They weren't ever quite buried, but at least they were dropped into some kind of pit. And to this day, Britons use as a slang expression that they're feeling knackered when they're very, very tired. And my English friends will verify that, I'm sure, in the comments below. But there were knackeries and places you could dispose of dead animals. But they really didn't still quite get the idea that a dead animal, because it was attracting flies and everything, could be the source of disease as well. And again, up until the Second World War, everybody was still burning coal. So the air pollution was just incredible. And nasal snuff would help you at least olfactorily deal with that. Now, that may be a reason why members of parliament started taking snuff and why there is, to this day, a snuff box in the House of Lords that all the lords as they pass are free to take a pinch of. No, it is not paid for by British taxpayer expense. I forget who the actual title, I think it's the doorkeeper is his title, of the Houses of Parliament, as a matter of recent tradition, pays a few pounds every year to refill the snuff box. The snuff box itself was a gift to the English Parliament by Winston Churchill after the original one was destroyed in a German air raid. But they still pinch snuff. In case you're curious, it is Wilson's of Sharrow's Rose of Sharrow snuff is what they pinch in Parliament. And I imagine that if you had the big stink going on in 1858 right outside your windows, it'd be nice to have some nice scented snuff. That is the story of the big stink of 1858. Thank you for watching. Just having a little fun with you on this Thursday night, the 21st of October, 2021. Don't forget, about another week to get your postcards in for the big nasal snuff gift certificate giveaway. There will be another giveaway in January 2022. Be watching for that. We'll go back to email entries since it appears that none of you are rich enough to buy a goddamn stamp. But, how much is a stamp? Come on. It's not worth it, Pay $1 for a stamp and maybe win a $30 gift certificate. Yeah, well, whatever. You guys, cheap asses. That's probably why you use snuff, the least expensive form of tobacco out there. I'm Paul, busting your balls a little bit and thinking about the big stink. We'll talk soon.